I'm Brian Diebold, and I serve as pastor of Crossroads Church. I've been here for almost a year now. Moved here from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to my sunny Texas. Crossroads Church is a church of about 160 members. We live in a kind of changing community in Windcrest. We're right on the crossroads of two neighborhoods, which is why we have the name that we do. One neighborhood is more affluent and stable. The other is more lower income. And at the same time, the one neighborhood is mostly white, whereas the other is mostly African American and Hispanic. And so we are a church that's ministering right at that crossroads. Okay, in a lot of ways, so I think the way to answer that is to tell you our story. Previously, the pastor who had been here before was Malcolm McQueen, and he had served for 18 years and had a very healthy ministry here. When he left, that sent the church kind of into shock. And they had already been in the process of doing some consultation with some church growth organizations, and they were in the midst of that actually when he left. And so it really created a gut check for the congregation. They had been, like most congregations in our denomination, in that kind of gradual decline of losing slightly more people through attrition than they were gaining, but a healthy church. And this kind of forced them to ask, what are we doing here, and why are we doing it, and what do we expect to change if we're not going to change? And so they had a 3-year interim ministry before I came with Pastor Peter Haas. And they ended up firing the consultant and doing the New Beginnings process that the denomination offers instead. And the recommendation was for the church to move. Most of the membership, or a good portion, does not live in this neighborhood, and was coming from north of the city. As I mentioned, the demographics around the church have changed, and the church membership doesn't match that. We have some African American and Hispanic families in our congregation, but are majority white and majority middle class or above. And there was just the feeling that this congregation, as it is, was not really built to reach the neighborhood. And so the recommendation was to move, to sell this campus and to start a new church up north. And that was a hugely divisive issue in the church, and it led to what we refer to as the vote. And the vote to move failed by just a handful of people. And there was a majority that voted to move, but it wasn't a supermajority. And so that left the church still here, but divided about it. And so that kind of became a rock bottom for the congregation. The session got together and came up with its own strategic proposal, adopted a new mission statement and vision statement, and really took ownership for what they were going to do. The decision was, well, we thought it was best to move. That's clearly not going to happen. So what do we do now? How do we make this work? And that really began the process of growth, to answer your initial question. Our church has a campus of 5 buildings, and the congregation was barely using most of them. Most buildings were getting used maybe an hour out of the week. And so the major transformation was the church formed a team. We called it the Campus Utilization Team, CUT for short, to reconfigure how we use the whole campus. And so essentially what happened is we condensed all the congregations used to our main administrative building and the sanctuary building, and then that freed up the remaining buildings to be used by outside partners. And so a lot of work was done clearing up those spaces, transforming them. We had one building was built as a youth building, and so every inch of wall space was covered in murals that the kids had done. And it was very cool, but made it totally unusable for anything else. And so at considerable expense, redid that building, and now it's used as a conference center. And we're looking at some long-term partners that might come in and use the space that we can do ministry together with, but also generate some income for the building. So we hired someone part-time to be the coordinator of all of that, our facilities and events coordinator, who works on bringing in revenue through rentals and conferences. And we have now several partners. We have an Ethiopian congregation, or Ethiopian Orthodox. We have a congregation of refugees from Democratic Republic of Congo. And so those two congregations worship in our space on Sundays as well. Our campus is such that we can do that without stepping on each other's toes. It's another way of living into that name of being Crossroads. And we have organizations that use our gym for basketball as serving the kids in our community. So the gym is used pretty much 7 days a week. It's the most used part of our campus. And we have recovery groups and community groups and a painting group and stuff like that. So we've really kind of redefined how we use this space to encourage community and to be part of the kingdom of God, that it doesn't necessarily have to be owned and directed by us in order for it to count. The other major transformation that came out of that was a change in name. Our church was founded as John Calvin Presbyterian Church, and for a long time it had been felt that that name was pushing people away, because while that name is important in our Presbyterian heritage, most people don't know who John Calvin is, and it sounded old and stodgy, and was kind of not presenting our best foot forward. So the name was changed to Crossroads Church, a Peace U.S.A. congregation. And so kind of changing the name communicated to the congregation that this is a fresh start, and got a lot of buy-in for the rest of the changes that were happening. And it's also communicated to the community a little better who we are, that this is an inviting and welcoming space. We often have visitors come who say they came because of the name Crossroads, that it spoke to where they were at in life or what they were looking for. So that's been another area of transformation. Most of that took place before I came here. And so my role has been to carry that momentum forward. We continue to do that through forming vision teams to keep us moving forward in our mission. Kind of, we're looking for one major focus of mission that we want to do, using some of the resources that we have, trying to retool and redevelop our ministry with youth. This church used to have enough youth here to require a whole building, and now we have about 3 or 4 teenagers, and maybe a handful of younger children. And so we're kind of rebuilding that from the ground up. That has kind of created a new energy at the church. We haven't grown significantly numerically, but there have been some new families coming back. Actually, what we've seen is a lot of people who used to be members of the church have started to come back as they've been hearing about the positive direction here. People believe in what we're doing, and so that's kind of created its own energy. So to answer the question of how we've grown, I think first required that hitting rock bottom, and that forced the congregation to admit, okay, well, we can't leave. What we're doing isn't working. We have to do something new. And so kind of creating that openness in the congregation.
Great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's all the growing pains of sharing our campus with other organizations, and the congregation wondering or feeling insecure about, is this still my space? And do I still have ownership here? Sharing the kitchen is a challenge for our different ministries. The wear and tear on the building is much higher. As I mentioned, the gym is getting used 7 days a week. Well, now we need a new floor because the floor material in there was never designed for that amount of usage. So there's all the challenges of making everything fit into a finite amount of space. Whenever something goes missing or isn't where you thought it was, there's just that natural temptation of, well, is this because we have more outside use, that sort of thing. And so there's been some of those challenges. There were changes in our sanctuary configuration as well. Took out the pulpit, moved the communion table off of the chancel down to the main floor. And I think some people, that's taken a little bit to get used to. Most of the focus, though, I think, has been on moving forward. The congregation really felt so tired after the vote about whether to leave or stay, that they just really want to focus on moving forward and don't want to keep rehashing the past. And so most of the struggles have been, okay, what do we do next, and how do we pull it off? How do we attract young families and keep them? And honestly, it's all the spinning plates that are going. That's the main struggle, is just keeping up with all the things that are going, which is a good problem to have. Yeah. The transformation that took place here was because of the elders. They owned it and they made it happen. Pastor Peter, who was the interim here, did a great job in leading organizational change. And I'm eternally grateful to him for the platform he's created for us. But you know, it was after that hitting that low as a church where the session really took ownership of, well, somebody's got to drive this ship, and that somebody has got to be us. And so they were the ones with Pastor Peter who put together that strategic proposal and the mission statement and vision statement and said who they want to be. And then it was that CUT team, the campus utilization team, that really made the tough decisions that everybody knew needed to be made, but nobody had the authority. Nobody had the energy and the courage to do. And so they did that hard work of saying, you know, we had a daycare here that had been wonderful, but the church was expending a lot of money on it, and it had lost the church money its entire existence. And they made that hard decision that it's time to close that, which then made those spaces available for our Sunday school classes, which then allowed us to create openings in the other buildings that were being used for that. And kind of it was the domino effect that made this other stuff possible. We had some excellent leaders in that group who were able to keep the group on track, that were willing to tackle those tough decisions and saw them through. It was really elder-led, and it would not have happened without them. You know, Jesus calls us to die to ourselves and come follow him, and I think that God was involved in that painful engine rebuild of the church, of taking everything apart in order to put it back together. So I think partly that God took this congregation into that painful place that forced growth in terms of our openness and direction. Let's say a few other major areas where we have just seen God providing for us. We adopted this model of partnership, of using our campus for community partners. And our team did the work of kind of coming up with our approach and getting the buildings ready, but really didn't have a plan for how we were going to get those partners here or who they should be. And we have done, to this point, almost no advertising, and yet we have more people coming to us than we can handle, really. And it's really been amazing. I mentioned earlier that we have an Ethiopian Orthodox congregation that worships here. I was just one day, one of the priests of that congregation just knocked on our door. He didn't even come to the door where we were. It just was by chance that I heard him there and asked if we happened to have space. And this was exactly the sort of partnership that we've been looking for. And that has happened several times where these partnerships that are exactly the sort of thing we've been looking for and that have been so life-giving have just come out of the blue. And all of us have been fully aware and in wonder and amazement about and grateful that God has really both been confirming this direction for our church and also providing who God seems to want here. And that has made it seem like such an adventure, you know, that it's a lot of labor and work has gone into all the planning and the details, but there's just this sense of you never know who's going to come next and where this is all leading.
The hearts of our people with your fire, kindle all people with your fire.